All right, today we are diving deep into a plan out of Sweden that's taking on one of the planet's biggest climate problems, making steel. Seriously, this is an amazing story of wild ambition, really smart policy, and how they're totally reinventing an industry that's been around forever. Let's get right into it.
Everything really boils down to this one massive question. I mean, think about it. Steel is literally everywhere. It's in our cars, our homes, our bridges. We can't live without it. But the way we make it has been a total disaster for the climate. So what do? How do you solve that problem without bringing the whole modern world to a screeching halt?
So, to really appreciate what Sweden has managed to pull off, we first have to get our heads around the sheer size of the problem we're talking about.
And the numbers, they're just mind-boggling. Steel production is responsible for a whopping 7% of all CO2 emissions from our global energy system. Now, to put that into perspective, that's more than the entire airline industry and the entire shipping industry combined. It is a gigantic piece of the climate pie.
So why is it so dirty? Well, the problem is right at the very heart of the process. It's the traditional blast furnace. You see, for centuries, the basic recipe for steel has been blasting iron ore with mountains and mountains of coking coal. It's an industry that is fundamentally built on fossil fuels.
And this is the game-changing pivot at the center of this whole story. The old way, the blast furnace method, is the problem. It pumps out almost 3 tons of CO2 for every single ton of steel it makes. The Swedish solution? They just get rid of coal entirely and swap in green hydrogen. And the result is absolutely staggering. This new process cuts CO2 emissions by an incredible 95%. This isn't just a minor improvement, it's a complete revolution.
So how on earth did a shift this big even happen? Well, this wasn't some lucky accident or a random discovery in a lab. Not at all. This was the direct result of a very deliberate, very strategic, long-term national plan.
You know, they actually started laying the groundwork for this decades ago. Sweden brought in the world's first carbon tax way back in 1991. Then, in 2015, they set up a national climate framework, which included a legally binding target for the entire country to be net zero by 2045. These weren't just nice suggestions. These were clear marching orders for the entire economy. So how did they make those big goals a reality? They used a brilliant, classic stick and carrot approach. The stick? Oh, it's a big one. The world's highest carbon tax, at about $137 a ton. It makes polluting extremely expensive. But then you have the carrot, an industrial policy where the government actively steps in to make green innovation less risky, using things like grants and loan guarantees to make it easier for companies to take the leap. And this incredible policy environment really set the stage for the first hero of our story, a powerhouse of a project called HYBRIT. It was a state-driven effort designed to clean up the entire steel supply chain from top to bottom.
Now, HYBRIT's structure is really the secret to its power. It's a team-up between Vattenfall, the state-owned power company, LKAB, the state-owned iron ore miner, both 100% government-owned, and a private steel company, SSAB. Because the government owns 2/3 of the key players here, it can point the entire project toward its long-term climate goals, not just chasing next quarter's profits.
And here, this is where you see the real superpower of state ownership in action. The government, as the owner of the mining company LKAB, literally said, you know what, we'll accept a lower profit. They dropped the required return on equity from 12% down to 9%. That one move freed up billions for LKAB to pour into this green transition. I mean, can you imagine typical shareholders ever voting to make less money? The state could, because it was playing the long game for a national mission.
And the scale of this mission, it is just breathtaking. The transition of LKAB alone, just the state-owned mining company, is expected to cut annual CO2 emissions by 40 to 50 million tons. Let me put that in perspective for you. That is roughly equal to the entire yearly emissions of the whole country of Sweden. One company's change is as big as the nation's entire carbon footprint. Wow.
But hold on. The story doesn't end with this state-led giant. The next chapter brings in a totally new character. A fast, scrappy startup that came in and completely changed the dynamics of the game.
So in 2020, this new company called H2 Green Steel, or H2GS, just explodes onto the scene. And they had this huge advantage right from the start. They didn't have to spend years and millions proving the technology could work because the state-backed HYBRIT project had already done all that hard work. H2GS could just take that research and hit the ground running at an absolutely blistering pace.
And just look at their ambition here.
Before H2GS came along, Sweden made about 4 million tons of steel a year. H2GS, by itself, plans to add another 5 million tons. They're literally on track to more than double the entire country's steel output. This sent a shockwave through the industry, injecting this massive dose of competition and urgency that forced everyone else to speed up.
But even a fast-moving startup needs a safety net, right? And this is where that government carrot we talked about comes right back into the picture. To get the billions in financing it needed to build its plants, H2GS received a €1.2 billion green credit guarantee from the government. The state basically co-signed the loan, signaling to all the private banks, hey, this project is a national priority. It's a safe bet. Okay, so when you put all these different pieces together, what are the key lessons? Let's try to boil down the Swedish blueprint into a simple, clear recipe for success.
So here it is, the 4 key ingredients. First, you have to set a clear, long-term direction, that national net zero goal. Step 2, the government has to step in and take on some of the early risk, using things like grants and loan guarantees to make it safe for private money to follow. Step 3, you turbocharge the whole thing by using state-owned companies to drive that national mission, even if it means less profit. And finally, you light a fire under everyone by encouraging competition, letting new startups come in and force the old guard to move faster.
You know, this entire strategy is a perfect example of a concept called the entrepreneurial state. And this is a really important idea. The old way of thinking was that government's job is to be a referee, to fix problems in the market but otherwise stay out of the way. This idea says, no way. For massive challenges like climate change, the government has to be an active player. It has to be a risk taker and a co-creator, actively shaping and building the green markets of the future, almost like a venture capitalist for the whole country.
And that all leaves us with one final, really powerful question. Sweden has shown the world how to decarbonize one of the toughest, most stubborn industries there is. They've given us the playbook. So the question for everyone else is, what's next? What other supposedly impossible industry, whether it's cement or chemicals or aviation, is ready for its own green revolution?